In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make this really rather striking cushion cover. It's made using half hexagons and arranged, as you can see, in a chevron effect, and it's got a very simple envelope backing as well. So it's a simple cushion cover to make, but I think it looks a lot more complicated than it actually is. Now, I've left all of your cutting instructions in the description box below, so have a look at everything that you need, and let's get sewing. I'm actually going to use a 2¼ inch hexagon for this pattern. It can be any size that you like, so that's not set in stone, purely because I've got a 2-inch hexagon template, the only one I've got, and it has a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which gives me the distance here of 2¼ inches. And you measure your hexagon along each one of the 6 sides, not from one side to another. So let's pop this on here, and I'm going to draw around the edge. Now, of course, you could cut through more than one at a time, depending what type of fabric you have and how you're cutting. So if you're cutting with a rotary cutter ruler and mat, you can probably cut up to 6 pieces at the same time. But we'll just do the one for now, just so I can show you how I do this. So again, literally draw all the way around. I know some templates that you can buy, you can use your rotary cutter straight up against it. This one, I'm just going to use my ruler across the drawn line, and if you're going to be cutting a few of these, I would suggest that you invest in a rotary cutter ruler and mat, not with your scissors, because you'll find this is a lot more accurate, quicker, and a lot easier as well. You imagine if you're lifting your fabric up when you're using scissors, it can distort the shape. So using a rotary cutter helps everything to sit nice and flat as you're cutting. So this is actually going to make 2 half hexagons, obviously, because I'm going to chop this in half in just a second. And you're going to need 6 of these for each block. So there's my hexie. And then I'm going to cut across from one point to another to cut that in half. I normally use a smaller rotary cutter, it's the only one I've got down here at the moment. So we have these, so let's put our 6 together. I've already cut some others. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And obviously the amount of these that you're using is going to depend on, I've got 7 there, on the size of the block that you want. Then I'm going to take a 1-inch strip of black fabric, and I'm using black because I think it really stands out and it picks up on the colour of the background of one of my pieces as well. And I'm going to sew this right sides together to the edge. Now I'm going to sew them in a row, but do be aware that when you turn these over, we're going to cut at an angle. So don't put them very close together like this, because when you flip them over, where you're going to cut the black fabric will cross. So you need to leave a gap in between those. So pop those raw edges together and we'll sew. And I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'll just keep adding these as I sew. It doesn't matter in which order. It's a little bit like hexie bunting. And again, leaving that little gap in the centre. And I'm going to press all of these before I cut them. And I'm just pressing in the direction that they want to go, so I'm not worried whether it's up or down. They seem to have found their own way. Mine just happened to be going upwards. Then back to the cutting mat, and we'll cut in between each one. So I'm lining my ruler up against the edge of the hexagon and cutting the black fabric at that same angle. Now of course you don't have to use the black fabric, you can pick up on any colour that's in your fabric or choose something that's a complete contrast. I'll leave that up to you. So if you've got maybe very bold colours, then white would look good. I wouldn't use a fabric that's too much the same colour as your hexagons though, because you may find that it just blends in too much, and we want these lines to really stand out. These really do form the shape, or the impact I should say, of your half hexes. And of course I'm only doing one block here. I've already made up my other 3 blocks. You'd do all of your hexes all at the same time so that they're all ready to go on your cushion cover when you're finished. That's my last one. And then we can start to arrange them. So I've already got quite a few here actually. So the way it goes is you'll have your first hexie here, and the second one goes at an angle like so. And then we'll go above here and here. So you're kind of working upwards until I've got my 6 pieces. I think I'll have that one there and that one there. And of course you can keep going with this. So if you were going to make a table runner, you could carry on just adding as many of these as you wanted to until you've got the length that you like, and then just add a couple of borders down each side and across the bottom and the top. If you're making placemats or something like that, maybe use a bigger hexagon so that they're wider, so you can get a nice big square out of those. But mine's just going to be a little panel, and I'm going to mix those together in different ways. So let's sew these 2 together first of all. So I'm going to fold this over and overlap the point here by 1/4 inch. This is the only time you have to do this. It's the only time you have to do any kind of measuring as you're putting these together, and I'm just doing that by eye, as you can see, and sew along this side. And the reason I've overlapped it by 1/4 inch is now the top of that is a perfectly straight line. So I'm just going to finger crease this time, and then take my next piece, which was going to be this one, and sew across here. And you will find that you overlap by that 1/4 inch at each side when you're sewing this on centrally. A nice even seam allowance, and we just carry on until we've got all 6 pieces put together. And again, I'm just finger pressing in between each one. I'll press those properly at the end. I think it's really fun to see this come together as well, and it looks an awful lot more complicated than it is, don't you think? So there's no matching points or anything like that. It is actually a very simple design, but it does have that striking effect when it all comes together. And just one more. And again, do have fun with the colours. You could have these, you don't have to have a whole set of coordinating or a collection of prints. These could be plain solid colours, or maybe all in black and white with a red border would look amazing. So maybe have a play with the types of fabrics that you already have and see what you can come up with. But you imagine black, white, black, white, black, white, red, I think would look fantastic. Okay, so I'm just pressing that again in the direction that it wants to go. So I'm not overly fussed about to the dark side, the light side, or open or anything like that. We'll just press it. And then I need to make sure this is big enough for my 6-inch, is it 6-inch block? Let me just remeasure. Because I have, as I said, already made up 3 blocks already. These are 5.5-inch blocks. Plenty there. So let's match this up. So I'm looking at this point at the moment and making sure I've got my 5.5 inches over the main part of the fabric so I can cut that square. So let's go across here. It's a bit thick. Whoops, I'll trim that down again. And then 5.5 inches this way. And then in this direction as well. So that's my block. Now I'm just going to join 4 of these together, because I've got quite a small cushion pad, so I can have a play now and see how I want them to look. So initially I thought I'd have them all facing in opposite directions like so, and I like that look. It looks a little bit like stained glass window, doesn't it? What happens if I put them all in the same direction? I quite like that. That's a very different look to previous. Let's turn it around. That's it, isn't it? Or we could go that way. Not so keen on that one. I like them all going in opposite directions, I think. So none of the lines actually make up. It looks like a little bit of crazy patchwork there. So that's how I'm going to sew mine. So first of all, I'm going to take another one of my 1-inch strips of black fabric, and I'm going to sew 2 of these pieces together to one of those. So let me make sure I get them in the right position. So I'm just going to snip that down a little bit. And sew this right sides together. And again, there's no rules. You have a play around and see what you think you think looks best for your project, is what I was trying to say. Let's fold that back. Trim this to the size of the block. And then sew this one on the bottom. Don't normally pin with things like that, but that's up to you. If you prefer to, then do so. There we go. So I just like to line up the raw edges as I'm sewing, and so line it up as I go. I think that block needs trimming down a little bit. It looks a little bit wider than the other one. It is very slightly wider. No harm done. Trim that away. And then I'm just going to rearrange these again just to make sure that I've got them in the right order. That was it. So then these 2 go together like so. And double check as many times as you need to that that you've got your blocks in the order that you want them to be, because there's nothing worse than sewing all of these together and then realizing that that you've got them wrong, and then you're unpicking. My daughter had a really good idea actually when she's doing patchwork pieces, maybe with a little bit more patchwork pieces than this has, of pinning everything to a, I was going to do that, to a polystyrene board. She got a big piece of polystyrene and just puts a pin in the middle of each one of the different sets, so they're always in the right order. And it also means that she can carry that from wherever she's laying out the pieces to the sewing machine. I thought that was an ingenious idea, which I shall certainly be pinching from her. Okay, so those are those pieces. I'm now going to iron those. And again, just in whichever direction it chooses to go. And that one. And then these two, just checking again, that's how I want them to be. See, got that upside down. And these two are going to be joined together down the centre here. So let's flip that over. So this one. Again, it's quite important that you keep that 1/4 inch seam allowance, so all of your borders are the same size, particularly if you're working with black like this, because it can stand out a little bit if you get a wobbly stitch line. Let's trim these end bits off. And then these two together. And then we'll give that one a press as well. My black seams are actually folding inwards. They just wanted to curl that way, so that's the way I've let them go. Right, so that's my finished patchwork design. I'm now going to add a border just to make it a little bit bigger to go onto my cushion cover, and I don't want the edges of this to disappear into the side seams. So I've cut 2-inch strips this time, and I'm going to sew one across the bottom, one across the top, and then one down each side. So let's trim this down so it's more manageable. So it doesn't really matter if it's top, bottom and sides, the order that you do these in, because it's a kind of a non-directional cushion cover. It doesn't matter which way round it's going to go. And I'll just press that back. And then we'll put the other two sides on just the same way. Now you can make these borders a lot deeper if you need to. So if you find that you've got quite a small patch in on a large cushion, of course you can make these wider. Or if you're making this into a bag, maybe you'd want to add a larger border at the top and the bottom than you do at the sides. So again, have a play, have a think about that as you're planning your design and your project, what you're going to make, and then decide. So there's lots of kind of alternatives with this design, not just in the things that you make and the positions that you put everything, but in the sizes that you're going to use as well. Because remember, mine are quite small hexagons. If you have got a larger project, you may want to use larger hexagons. You could even double the size and have a 5-inch hexagon. And another piece across the bottom here. It's quite quick as well when you consider how long this has taken to put together, and I think that's largely due to not having any, points to match or any particular accuracy, if you like. It does come together quite quickly. Snip these edge bits off. And we'll press this. Now then, next bit again, your choice. If you wanted to quilt this, then you're going to need some wadding on the back of it. So I'd use an 80-20 myself, and maybe fuse that to the back of this piece with 505 spray, a repositionable spray adhesive, and then quilt it. Because it's such a busy pattern, personally, I would maybe quilt around the edge. I may do one line of stitches down the centre. I might echo quilt inside each one of these half hexagons, but again, that's up to you. There's no need to quilt it. It's not a quilt, it's a cushion cover, but you will need some wadding behind that if you wanted to give it that extra little bit of depth. I think it's fine like this. I don't think it needs anything else. So this is just what I'm going to use to make my cushion cover with. And now I'm left with a cushion front, which is exactly 14 inches square. Now my cushion pad is 14 inches square, and that means by the time I've lost half an inch in a seam allowance, I'm going to have a nice plump cushion. Make your cushion front a little bit bigger if you wanted your cushion to be flatter, but I like mine nice and fat. So what I've done with the back of the fabric, and this is the simplest way to make an envelope back, is to cut 2 pieces of fabric which are like a magnet to threads when you make them in black, and these are the same width as my cushion front, but they are about 2/3 of the depth, and that means that when these overlap, I get the envelope back to it. So because this is a raw edge, I mean, there's lots of different ways of making cushion backs. You could line this if you wish. I'm sure I've got a YouTube tutorial on lining a cushion. You could fold this fabric in half instead of hemming it. They take up a little bit more fabric, but they do give a more luxurious finish. But if you're making a cushion cover for yourself, who's going to know? So all I'm doing here is folding the edge of the fabric over twice by 1/4 of an inch or thereabouts, and then sewing to hem. So I find it easier to just keep rolling and folding the hem as I'm sewing. If you wanted to take this to the ironing board first of all and press it before you sew, then that will give you a very accurate hem. So a contrast thread might be quite nice as well. It would really stand out if you're going to see the back of your cushion cover at all. So in this case, maybe a lilac would have been nice. Snip that off, and then we'll do the same with this piece. So this would be to the wrong side if your fabric has a right and wrong side. So just keep rolling and hemming. And again, such a simple way of making a cushion cover. If zips are a little bit daunting for you, this is so much simpler. Okay, then we're going to overlap these pieces. So facing right side down and edge to edge with the hem that I've just made across the centre. Let's match up all of those raw edges and pop a few pins in here to hold them in place. Now as I'm going to sew all the way around the edge in just a second. So I'm putting a pin where the overlap is. I think that's important. I'm going to sew all the way around the edge, but when I come to the overlap section, I'm going to just go over those two pieces there a couple of times. I'll show you, just to make that a little bit more secure, because there will be strain on that seam when you put your cushion pad inside. So there's an overlap, just do a few back stitches, there's another one, and then I'll sew all the way around and do the same on the other side where the overlap happens. Let's take out the pins. And then I'm going to snip across the corners just to cut down on the bulk and make the points a little bit pointier when I turn this through. Then we'll turn the whole thing the right side out. And give it a press if it needs it, and then we'll put the cushion pad inside and we're finished. So I'm just going to use my point turner to push those corners out nicely. And one final press. See how that overlaps quite nicely. Don't be too mean on the overlap, because we don't want that to gape when the cushion pad goes inside. Let's trim away any loose threads that are poking out as well. And give it a good old press. On both sides. So that's my cushion cover finished. All I need to do now is to put the pad inside. And there's my cushion cover finished. Does it look impressive? And I think it looks so much more complicated than it is. And again, you've got that really neat but very simple envelope backing to it. I'm sure this is a technique that you're going to use on so many different projects. As I said previously, try making the hexagons in different sizes. Maybe small for a purse, and then a larger one for a tote bag to match. But have a think about table runners, bed runners, placemats, any kind of bags, and of course longer cushion covers. The list is endless of what you can create with this technique. It's fun, and I think it looks absolutely striking. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Join me again for more very soon. Bye bye.